Hi again. W.C. Stevenson, The Inside Story of Jehovah's Witnesses in Britain. It was Year of Doom, 1975. We're looking now at Chapter 4. Stevenson was a circuit servant before leaving the Watchtower in the mid-1960s, and he realizes, looking back now, only 2 years out when he wrote this book, that they keep their members, and even draw probably many of their members, with their proof of the last days. So now he looks at the proof of the last days, which I must admit was the biggest reason I got involved and left my career in music. My plan to be a musician for the rest of my life, and joined in 1971 by baptism. Chapter 4, The Illusion of the Last Days. In 6 days Jehovah made the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th day he rested and proceeded to refresh himself. So reads the New World Translation's rendering of Exodus, chapter 31, verse 17. The Genesis account of creation is taken quite literally by Jehovah's Witnesses on the grounds that the order in which creation is recorded as taking place is in harmony with modern scientific knowledge. However, although the order of creation is accepted literally, the idea of the whole creative process taking place in 7 days is interpreted symbolically. The 7 days, we are told, refer to periods of thousands of years in length. This is a very reasonable assumption, because he would be considered foolish who today would insist that all life on earth was brought about in 1 literal week. But the witnesses, taking the matter a stage further, presume to tell us exactly how long each creative day is. According to their calculations, each day is 7,000 years long, making the whole creative process cover a period of 49,000 years. How do the witnesses arrive at this conclusion? It is based upon the assumption that the length of the 7th day, the Sabbath, can be calculated. Since it is assumed that God has not created anything or anybody since man, he is therefore presumed to be still resting from his creative work. In other words, the 7th day, or Sabbath, is still in progress. By starting at the year 539 BC, which is claimed to be the absolute proved year in which Cyrus, king of Persia, overthrew the Babylonian dynasty, and working backwards through the Old Testament by means of its various chronological records, the witnesses have arrived at the year 4026 BC as the date for the creation of Adam. It is therefore roughly 6,000 years since the creation of Adam in Eden. Since the witnesses believe that in this generation, the millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Christ, is due to begin, we must therefore add another 1,000 years to the already elapsed 6,000, giving us 7,000 years in all as the length of the 7th day. If the 7th day is 7,000 years long, then it is reasonable to suppose that all the other 6 days are of the same duration. This, by the way, was very impressive to me when I first got their explanation, as Stevenson records it here. Of course, apart from the objection which is immediately raised to assuming that we are living on the threshold of the millennium, it might well be asked on what grounds we can correctly conclude that Jehovah will finish his Sabbath at the end of the millennium. There's nothing in the Bible to suggest that God will cease to rest at that time and begin new works of creation. In fact, the Bible has very little to say about the happenings on earth after the millennium. But I have outlined the witnesses' ideas on creation because I think that they illustrate very well the most important feature of the movement. Everything it believes, everything it does, is prompted by the conviction that we are living in the last days of this world. All calculations, such as the one just outlined, are based on this assumption. It is, in fact, a religion that will either stand or fall by the fulfillment or non-fulfillment of its prophecies in this generation. Now, he had said that in the first chapter of the book, that he believed that 1975 wouldn't be the year of doom of the world, but rather the year of doom of the Watchtower. And of course, he was not correct about that, because the heart has its own reasons for clinging to the religion it's already committed to. And I think Stevenson and many others have miscalculated in that aspect, thinking that date setting is somehow going to destroy a religion. Well, most of the cults don't demonstrate that as really reality. Most of them survive their date setting miseries. He goes on, We must then try to answer the question, why are the witnesses so convinced that all these prophecies will take place in our lifetime? Because it is so fundamental to the thinking of the movement. The witnesses explain that there are two lines of evidence which lead them to conclude that these are the last days. One is chronology, the other is prophecy. I have already outlined in the second chapter something of the chronological proof to which they are referring. By resorting to different parts of the Bible and quoting isolated texts therefrom, they believe that they have proved that the appointed times of the nations, which began in 607 BC, ended in 1914 AD. Yet such is the unanimity of Bible scholars that the fall of Jerusalem took place not in 607, but in 586 BC, that an impartial reader must conclude that the starting point of the whole operation being wrong, the exercise itself is therefore unworthy of further attention. The other line of evidence is prophecy. It is claimed that there are 39 different signs of the last days, which are all prophetic scriptures thought to be having fulfillment at the present time, and which together make up a composite sign of the last days. Taken singly, it is conceded that they may not amount to much, but taken all together, it is stated that they provide irrefutable evidence that this is the last generation prior to the millennium. In considering the list of 39 signs as it appears in the book Make Sure of All Things, 1953, it's not necessary to discuss each one individually because, broadly speaking, they fall into two categories. First, on the assumption that the witnesses are God's chosen people, they are attempts to show that the modern history of the movement, since 1914, has been foretold in Scripture. Thus we have listed, apparently in all sincerity, as a sign of the last days, number 37, the work of Jehovah's Witnesses stopped in 1918. I will not comment on this type of sign here other than to refer the reader to chapter 7, which traces the history of the movement and describes these attempts to equate biblical prophecy with its changing fortunes. In the second, far larger category are signs which are references to world conditions, which it is thought are peculiar to this generation, and which have been foretold in Scripture. Under this heading we have such signs as number 2, world wars, number 3, widespread famines, number 4, unusual number of earthquakes, 9, increased lawlessness, and 23, people overly concerned with everyday affairs of life. Number 31, moral degeneracy in public and private life, and so on. Most of these signs are based on Jesus' words at Matthew 24 and Luke 21, in which chapters Jesus answers the disciples' question, "Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world?" Jesus' famous answer is that nation shall rise against nation, and there will be famines and earthquakes and pestilences and the like, and that these occurrences will be a sign of his coming and of the end of the world. Now, we have written about this and made videos about it quite a bit, and it's based on the misinterpretation of that very starting passage, Matthew 24:3. Christ is not making these things the sign. The word sign only occurs one more time, and that's when he talks about the sign of his coming as being his actual visible coming with the clouds. That there he uses the word sign again. This is all about something else. These so-called parts of the composite sign are actually therefore not the sign. We dealt with that in our J.C. Ryle videos quite a bit. And Carl Olive Johnson deals with this in his Sign of the Last Days book. You might want to get a copy of that. So I'm going to advocate for this book on other grounds. That is because it's a great inside look at Jehovah's Witnesses during the period of the build-up to 1975 by a former circuit servant. So it's got a lot to say about the psychology of why Jehovah's Witnesses don't just become witnesses, but stay there. Of course, it misapprehends what would happen when 1975 goes by. They'll just set another date. If Stevenson perhaps had known the history a little bit more and taken some time before he wrote this book to assess 1975 in the bigger pattern, he would realize that they didn't lose most of their followers in 1914. They stayed for other reasons. And that's also happened since 75 and also since 1999. So he'll go on with his analysis of the last days, which is generally very good. Next time we'll take up another few pages of this analysis. I want to link, though, the 7 predictions that Russell made about 1914. Now, we have done quite a bit on this in our playlist, Have Jehovah's Witnesses Ever Been God's Organization? So you might want to look for that playlist. And one of the videos in that playlist is the 7 predictions made in the book, The Time Is at Hand, about what would happen in 1914. And it's followed up by what happened after 1914. Russell's still alive. What did they do with those 7 predictions? And it shows you that they immediately start rewriting the history. That is, they actually edit out the dates in the editions earlier than 1914 and leave the rest of the book as is. So you can see, even while Russell's alive, covering up their own history. So I'll put in that one video, 7 predictions re 1914, and also the playlist of which it is a part. See you next time.